My name is Violet James. I'm 32 years old. Standing at the gate of my oceanfront mansion, I felt a strange mixture of emotions wash over me as I stared at the two people I never thought I would see again. My brother Christian and his wife Haley stood their luggage at their feet, desperation in their eyes as they begged to move in with me. 10 years ago, Christian punched me in front of our entire family and cut me off completely because Haley called me trash, and I dared to confront them about it. Before I tell you what decision I made that day, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. You won't believe what happened next. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Atlanta, the kind of place where every house had a trimmed lawn and neighbors waved as they drove by. Our own home wasn't big, but to me it felt like a whole world. 2 stories, white siding, and a small front garden where my mother planted roses every spring. Behind the house, there was a yard where Christian and I spent most of our childhood. We played tag, built makeshift forts with old blankets, and dug little trenches pretending we were explorers. He was 3 years older than me, tall for his age, and always seemed to know what to do. When I was little, I followed him like a shadow. If some neighborhood kid teased me, Christian would step in, puffing out his chest and declaring, "She's my sister. Leave her alone." Back then, I thought he would always be my protector. But everything started to shift when he turned 12. It was as though some invisible curtain fell, and suddenly, Christian wasn't just my brother anymore. He was the pride of the James family. My parents began to see him not as a boy, but as an investment. They enrolled him in private lessons, advanced classes, and every sports club imaginable. Soccer, basketball, debate team, you name it, they signed him up. My father bragged to anyone who would listen that Christian was destined for greatness, that he was the future of the family. And me? I became the background noise to his spotlight. At first, I didn't notice it. I was 9, still excited about school plays and art projects. I would come home, holding up my little certificates from spelling bees or the ribbons I won at the school science fair, expecting praise. Sometimes my mother would smile, but her eyes always darted back to Christian. If he had a basketball game that day, or if he'd aced a math test, that became the dinner table conversation. My father clapped him on the shoulder, repeating the same words. "That's my boy. You're going to make us proud." I can still picture one night in the kitchen. I was 10, clutching the first place certificate from my district art competition. I had worked for weeks on a watercolor painting of the garden behind our house, the roses blooming in pinks and reds, the old swing set leaning slightly in the corner. I thought my parents would hang it up in the living room. But when I showed them, they gave it a quick glance before turning back to Christian, who had just come home with a soccer trophy nearly the size of my torso. My certificate ended up on the fridge, half covered by grocery lists, while his trophy took the center spot on the mantel. The imbalance grew clearer each year. When Christian entered middle school, my parents started talking about elite academies and scholarships. They spent weekends driving him to tournaments, practices, and competitions. They scraped together money for private tutors, always insisting it was worth it because he has potential. When I asked for piano lessons, my mother sighed and said, "Violet, those are expensive. Besides, you don't really need them. You're fine with your hobbies." But if Christian wanted something, new cleats, an upgraded computer, extra tutoring, the answer was always yes. It wasn't just about money. It was about attention. Our house was filled with constant conversations about Christian's future. My mother would beam with pride telling relatives, "Christian is doing so well. He's top of his class." At family gatherings, uncles and aunts shook his hand, calling him the golden boy. And me? I got pats on the head, maybe a quick, "Oh, Violet's doing fine too." My wins, my little triumphs in school plays or writing contests, vanished like whispers in a storm. I remember the annual school talent show. I had practiced a monologue for weeks, memorizing every line, pouring all my emotions into it. On the day of the show, I wore my best dress, nervous but excited. I looked out into the audience, hoping to see my parents' faces. But the seats were empty. They were at Christian's basketball semifinal instead. When I got home with my small medal, they barely looked at it. "That's nice, honey," my mother said, distracted. But did you hear? Christian's team won by 20 points. The medal went into a drawer, forgotten. By the time I reached middle school, the pattern was set in stone. I wasn't the star child, I was the extra. Teachers often told my parents that I was smart, hardworking, and creative, but none of it mattered. My mother would politely thank them and then turn the conversation back to Christian, his math grades, his sports, his competitions. At home, his schedule dictated everything. Family dinners were cut short so he could get to practice. Vacations were planned around his tournaments. My world revolved around his. And Christian noticed. Slowly, he began to mirror our parents' attitude. He used to defend me. Now he teased me. If I brought home a drawing I was proud of, he would smirk and say, "Cute. But it's not like it'll get you into college." If I won a spelling bee, he'd laugh, "Yeah, but can you dribble a ball?" It wasn't always cruel. Sometimes he meant it as a joke, but I felt the sting every time. Still, there were moments when I glimpsed the brother I used to know. On nights when I struggled with math homework, he'd lean against my doorframe, sigh, and say, "Move over, idiot. You're doing it all wrong." Then he'd spend 20 minutes breaking down equations in a way that actually made sense. Another time, he left a chocolate bar on my desk with a scribbled note, "For good luck on your test." Those tiny acts of kindness kept me from completely breaking away from him. But the contrast was undeniable. By the time I entered my teenage years, the gap between Christian and me had grown into a canyon. He was 16 then, tall and athletic, always surrounded by friends, while I was 13, awkward, bookish, trying to figure out where I fit. The ridicule only got worse when boys entered the picture. I still remember the first time I invited a boy over, Kevin, a shy kid from my math class. We sat on the porch, nervously sipping sodas, when Christian strolled by with that smirk he reserved just for me. He plopped down in the chair opposite us and started telling Kevin the most embarrassing stories from my childhood. How I used to sing to my dolls, how I once peed my pants at the county fair, how I was scared of thunderstorms and hid in his closet until I was 10. Kevin laughed politely, but I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. Christian winked at him as if they were in on some secret joke. By the time Kevin left, I wanted to disappear. He never came back, and the next week at school, I overheard kids repeating one of those humiliating stories. That was Christian's way of keeping me in my place, making sure I never felt like I could catch up to him, not even in my small teenage attempts at independence. Still, every once in a while, we'd have these strange moments of connection that confused me. Like the evening before one of my science presentations when he tossed me a flash drive and muttered, "I fixed your slides." They were boring as hell. I opened them later to see he had added graphics and transitions that made the whole thing look professional. Those gestures were rare, but they kept me tethered to the idea that maybe, deep down, my brother still cared about me, even if he'd never admit it. I clung to them because I needed to believe I wasn't completely alone in that house. But I didn't know it then, but that fragile thread between us would be the reason I held on for far longer than I should have. By the time I reached the end of high school, I was exhausted from always being in the shadow of my brother. But instead of letting it crush me, I decided I would prove, first to myself, then to everyone else, that I could build a life on my own terms. I threw myself into my studies, pushed harder than ever, and when graduation came, I walked across that stage with honors. My name was finally called in the same breath as achievement, not just as Christian's sister. The scholarship to the University of Wisconsin felt like my ticket out. Out of Atlanta, out of my parents' house, out of that constant comparison. I remember sitting in my empty bedroom the night before I left, staring at the bare walls where my drawings had once hung, and whispering to myself, "This is your chance, Violet. Don't waste it." College was nothing like home. It was liberating and terrifying all at once. I wasn't anyone's background noise there. I was just Violet, one more student in a sea of faces trying to carve out their futures. For the first time, I had space to dream without someone constantly telling me my dreams were foolish. That's when I stumbled upon the idea that would change everything. It happened in the most ordinary way. I was in a little corner store near campus, buying instant noodles, the cheap kind that had practically become my lifeline. The owner, an older man with tired eyes, was muttering under his breath, flipping through a messy notebook filled with scribbles and half-erased numbers. When I asked if something was wrong, he sighed. I can't keep track of my stock. Either I order too much and it goes bad, or I run out when customers need it. That conversation stuck with me. Later, sitting in the university library, surrounded by glowing laptop screens and the smell of coffee, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if there was a simple digital service, an app, that could help small stores like his manage their supplies without the chaos of notebooks and guesswork? That's how Stockmate was born, at least in my imagination. I wasn't a computer science major, I barely knew the basics, but the idea consumed me. I started sketching out designs, researching existing software, talking to other small shop owners in town. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this could actually work. Of course, belief alone didn't pay the bills. I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked through the night. Rent ate up almost everything from my scholarship stipend, so I worked wherever I could, mornings as a dishwasher in the campus cafeteria, evenings at a little cafe off State Street, weekends picking up odd jobs. Dinner was usually macaroni and cheese or ramen, sometimes both if I was especially hungry. I told myself it was temporary, that this struggle was the price of independence. Whenever exhaustion threatened to drown me, I thought of Christian. I thought of the way he'd roll his eyes whenever I talked about my interests, or how my parents laughed when I mentioned building something of my own. That memory fueled me more than caffeine ever could. When I finally told my parents about Stockmate, their reaction was exactly what I expected and exactly what I needed to hear. We were on the phone, my mother on one end, Christian's voice faintly in the background. I explained my idea with all the excitement I felt, how it could help small businesses, how it could grow. There was silence for a beat and then laughter. Violet, my father said, hundreds of apps are created every day. 99% fail. Do something serious, like your brother. Don't waste your time with toys, my mother added. Their words should have crushed me. Instead, they lit a fire. If they believed I couldn't do it, then I would show them I could. So I poured every ounce of myself into Stockmate. I taught myself to code late at night, hunched over my laptop with YouTube tutorials and library books as my guides. I begged classmates in computer science to help me debug my first clumsy prototypes, offering to buy them coffee I could barely afford. I tested the app with local shopkeepers, listening to their frustrations, tweaking features again and again. There were days when I thought I'd collapse from exhaustion. Days when I looked at my bank balance and wondered how I'd pay rent. Nights when I cried silently into my pillow, wondering if my parents were right, if I was just chasing a fantasy. But giving up was never an option. I had left to prove that my life could matter, that my work could matter. Every macaroni dinner, every late-night coding session, every rejected idea was part of that fight. I wasn't just building an app. I was building myself. The day Stockmate officially launched should have been the proudest of my life. I had spent countless nights coding until sunrise, eating cold noodles with one hand while typing with the other, convinced I was creating something that could actually change things for small businesses. I sent emails to shop owners I had interviewed, posted announcements on forums, and even handed out flyers around campus with trembling hands. I believed I was ready, but reality hit me like a storm. Within a week, the complaints started rolling in. The interface was clunky, confusing to people who weren't tech-savvy. Buttons didn't work the way they should. Sometimes the app froze entirely, leaving shopkeepers staring at error messages while their customers waited at the counter. One angry owner told me, "Your app made things harder, not easier." I tried to act calm, but inside I was unraveling. Every bug report felt like a dagger. Every cancellation email felt like confirmation that my parents had been right. This is a toy, Violet, nothing serious. I barely ate, barely slept. My tiny apartment, already a depressing space with peeling paint and noisy neighbors, became a cave of failure. I'd lie on my mattress at night, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering why I ever thought I could succeed. That was when I almost quit. The only reason I didn't was because of one person, Professor Richard Hall. He was a computer science lecturer at the university, known for being both brilliant and intimidating. I had taken one of his elective classes, and though I was far from the top student, he noticed my determination. One day after class, as I lingered by the door, he asked why I always looked half asleep. I confessed about the app. He listened, then said, "Show me." When he saw Stockmate, he didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me the way my parents had. Instead, he pointed out the flaws with precision, but also with patience. "The idea is good," he said, "but you're carrying it alone, and that's why it's breaking you." He became my mentor, the first adult in my life who looked at me and didn't see a failure or a background character. He introduced me to 3 computer science students, bright, hungry, willing to take risks. We met in the dingy basement of the library, working on battered laptops surrounded by empty coffee cups. We took the entire code apart and started over. It was humiliating, in a way, to realize how many mistakes I had made. But with Richard guiding us, I learned that failure wasn't final. It was just data, showing us what to fix. That period was brutal. My bank account hovered near zero. I worked 2 jobs just to keep myself afloat, and the weight of responsibility never left me. But something shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. We laughed at our missteps, celebrated small victories like solving a glitch that had stumped us for weeks, and slowly, painfully, Stockmate began to transform into something real. 2 years passed in that rhythm. Work, exhaustion, breakthroughs, setbacks, more work. While Christian was probably traveling for sports or shaking hands at competitions, I was in that basement, hunched over a screen, rewriting my future line by line. My parents never asked how the app was going. They assumed it had failed and didn't bother pressing. Maybe they liked believing I was proving them right. But then came the moment everything changed. We relaunched Stockmate with a new code, leaner and smoother, and this time, customers didn't complain. They thanked us. A bakery owner told me she finally stopped overordering flour and losing money. A hardware store said they no longer ran out of nails on busy weekends. The app wasn't just functioning, it was helping. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. Local stores recommended it to each other, and within months, we were turning a modest profit. The first time I saw actual revenue, money that came not from washing dishes or serving coffee, but from something I had built with my own hands, I cried. Not just tears of joy, but of relief, exhaustion, vindication. I had proven it. To myself, to my parents, to every dismissive look I had endured. That euphoria carried me through everything else. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was building something that mattered. I didn't need my parents' approval or Christian's shadow or anyone else's validation. Stockmate was mine. My blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights had turned into something real. And for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Then, Christian brought Haley home on a humid August weekend, the kind of Georgia heat that makes the air feel sticky even in the shade. She arrived in a white sundress and sunglasses that probably cost more than my first laptop, her nails pale pink, her smile practiced. Mom rushed out with a tray of lemonade like she was welcoming a head of state. Dad straightened his collar twice before shaking her hand. Haley's father is a major developer in Miami, he announced, as if that fact alone deserved a standing ovation. I stood by the kitchen island, invisible, while my mother showed Haley the good china as if she already belonged to the family. Christian hovered near her elbow, attentive, proud. He looked at her the way I used to look at brochures for a life I thought I might someday have, hopeful, a little desperate. When I offered to help slice fruit, Mom waved me away. "Let Haley sit. She's our guest." We ate on the patio. Dad asked about Miami real estate, zoning permits, waterfront setbacks. Haley responded fluently, dropping names of architects and investors like pearls. When the conversation turned to me, more out of politeness than interest, Mom said, "Violet does something with an app for local stores." Haley tilted her head, sympathetic and amused. "A toy for small shops?" she asked, with a gentle laugh. "Startups like that die faster than flowers in a vase." She said it sweetly, like a compliment dressed as a prophecy. I felt my face flush, and I took a sip of warm lemonade to avoid speaking. Christian didn't correct her. He didn't say I'd built the app from nothing, or that stores used it daily, or that I'd kept it alive through sheer stubbornness. He squeezed her knee and changed the subject to a boat he wanted to rent for Labor Day. That should have been my warning. Over the next months, my parents treated Haley like she was the prize they'd always wanted. They invited her to every family dinner, asked her opinion on curtains and paint colors, asked her what brand of olive oil she preferred. My mother bought new throw pillows the week after Haley said our living room looked vintage in a cute way. Dad called her classy and refined. When I arrived one Sunday with a lemon tart, my first successful attempt at a recipe I'd been practicing, Mom barely looked at it. Haley can't eat sugar this week, she explained. She's on a plan. The tart sat untouched while Haley described the trainer who came to her building's gym. So I tried to be cordial. I answered her light questions, even when they were barbed. So, you don't have investors? You still live in a rental? Do your clients ever upgrade to something more robust? She delivered each line with a soft smile, the faintest tilt of her chin. I could have handled hostility better than kindness sharpened into a point. Then came the engagement, announced in a restaurant with a wall of wine bottles and a chandelier that looked like diamonds drowned in glass. Christian lifted his glass and said, "To the woman who makes me better," and my parents clapped loud enough for the next room to hear. I clinked my glass with theirs and pretended I wasn't bracing for impact. The engagement party was held at a rented event space downtown, velvet chairs, mirrored bar, florals that smelled like a garden pressed into a perfume bottle. The guest list was a parade of people who spoke in deals and drifted toward money like moths. I wore a simple navy dress I'd bought on sale and did my makeup in the car, my hands steady in the rearview mirror. I told myself I could survive a few hours of smiles. But I lasted 40 minutes. Near the bar, I overheard my parents speaking to Haley's aunt, a woman in a silk blouse the color of a bruise. They didn't see me, half hidden behind a pillar, pinning back a loose strand of hair. "She's always been a burden," my mother said, low and confident. "A real disgrace to the family," my father added, almost gently, like it was a fact to be filed and forgotten. The aunt made a sympathetic sound. "Well, some children bloom late." The words didn't feel like words. They felt like a door closing from the inside. I stood there with my plastic cup of champagne suddenly lead heavy in my hand, and I thought about every spelling bee ribbon, every school play, every late-night server shift, every bug I'd fixed with burning eyes, and how none of it had ever counted in that house. I left early. I told Christian I had a client call in the morning, and he nodded distractedly, his arm around Haley's waist, her ring flashing under the lights. In the car, I drove aimlessly for 20 miles before pulling into a grocery store parking lot. I sat there in the glow of the dashboard and cried until my chest ached. Not because they were right, but because they would never see me clearly. I tried to move on. Work helped. I added features to Stockmate, onboard 2 new clients, wrote documentation at my kitchen table, the hum of the fridge steady like a metronome. I went running on rainy mornings, the sound of my feet on wet pavement reminding me that my body could carry me farther than my heart believed. 3 months before the wedding, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but an old reflex made me swipe. "Violet," she began brightly, "weddings are expensive. We've made your contribution." I pressed the phone tighter. "What contribution?" "We used your credit card," she said, as if she were telling me she'd borrowed a sweater. "It's only $150,000. You can afford it." For a second, everything went silent, the room, the street outside, even the blood in my ears. Then sound came back in a rush, the neighbor's dog barking, the kettle clicking off, my own breathing suddenly shallow. "You what?" I asked. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she sighed. "It's for your brother. Family invests in family. You'll receive an invitation to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow, by the way. Formal attire." I opened my laptop with shaking hands and checked the accounts. Charges everywhere. Venue deposit, catering, floral design, a custom suit tailor, a block of rooms at a hotel with gold-trimmed doors. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a plan. They had copied my card, spent it like oxygen, and assumed I would swallow the debt as gracefully as the apple pie no one ate. I felt sick. I asked for explanations. None that mattered came. My mother tooted about stress. My father texted that we'd settle up later, which I knew meant never. Christian never called. Haley sent a single message, "We'll pay you back after the honeymoon. Promise." There was a winking emoji at the end, a tiny mocking star. I called the bank. Fraud department, hold music, the long recitation of purchases. The representative was kind, then cautious. The card wasn't reported stolen prior to the charges. Do you recognize any of the names? I recognized all of them. Recognition is different from consent. I froze my account anyway. I filed a report. I felt like I was pressing my palm against a flood with fingers that would not stop shaking. When I told my parents I wouldn't cover the debt, they shifted shape instantly. The charm fell away. The judgment returned like a tide. "Ungrateful," my mother said. "After everything we've done for you." "For me?" I asked, voice brittle. "For raising you," my father replied. "For putting up with your phases. For supporting your little projects. We thought you'd be proud to contribute to your brother's big day." I stared at the wall as if it could answer for them. My heart was loud in my chest. I said no again and again, until the word felt like a muscle I hadn't used in years, burning and necessary. They hung up on me. The silence after was a cliff edge. I stood on it and did not step back. The rehearsal dinner was all glass and candlelight, a room full of people trying to look like a family. I walked in late on purpose, sat at the end of a long table, and waited for the moment I knew was coming. I'd already told the bank. I'd frozen the card. I'd rehearsed my words in the car, hands cold on the steering wheel. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to tell the truth. When the salads arrived, I asked to speak to Christian and my parents. Haley floated over too, because Haley never missed a spotlight. We moved a few steps from the table, but not far. Their friends' eyes tracked us like cameras. I kept my voice calm. "It's theft," I said. "You used my card without my permission. I've disputed the charges. You need to contact the vendors and give them your own payment method." Haley tilted her head, lips curved like a ribbon. Then, loudly, so the nearest tables could hear, "How petty. She's being greedy for her only brother's wedding." Conversations around us paused, forks hung in midair. I felt a tremor in my hands, but kept them at my sides. "It's not petty," I said, clear enough for everyone to hear. "It's theft and humiliation." Haley's smile sharpened. "Humiliation? Violet, we're elevating this family. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You should be grateful to contribute." I looked at my parents. My mother studied a centerpiece, as if she'd never seen flowers before. My father adjusted his cufflinks like they were misbehaving. Neither met my eyes. "I said no," I repeated. "Reverse the charges." Christian's jaw moved the way it did just before a game, when his body held more energy than the room could contain. "You could have come to me," he said, voice tight. "You didn't have to embarrass us." "You embarrassed yourselves," I answered. "You took what wasn't yours and expected me to smile." Someone muttered, "Drama," near the bar. Glasses clinked. Haley made a sympathetic sound meant for the audience, not for me. "Christian," she said softly, but loud enough to stage whisper, "she's sabotaging your big day." He stepped closer. I could smell his cologne, the one he wore in high school when he still helped me with math. In another life, maybe we could have solved this. In this one, Haley's hand rested on his arm like a fuse waiting to be lit, and my mother finally looked up just long enough to give a small, decisive shake of her head at me. "I won't pay," I stated. "Call the florist, the venue, the hotel. Use your own cards. I'm done." Haley laughed, bright and brittle. "You hear that? She's proud of herself. A toy app and suddenly she thinks she's." I barely saw the movement. Just a blur. A flash of Christian's shoulder, and then the crack of pain like lightning across my cheek. My head snapped sideways. The room made a sound I'll never forget, one collective inhale that never turned into outrage. I steadied myself on the edge of a chair and tasted copper. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. No one moved. No one said, "Stop." No one stood between us the way he used to stand between me and boys who teased me in the yard. The people who knew our family best looked anywhere but at me. My mother's eyes slid to the dessert table. My father exhaled through his nose, slow, as if considering a business negotiation. Haley's mouth opened just enough to show teeth. It wasn't shock. It was satisfaction. "Apologize," Christian said, chest heaving. "Right now." "For what?" I asked, the words thick. My cheek throbbed, heat blooming under the skin. "For refusing to be robbed?" Haley's hand squeezed his arm. "Security," she called lightly, scanning the room as if she were about to request a different wine. No one came. There was no security, only witnesses who had chosen their side long before tonight. A waiter hovered, then retreated. Someone at the head table lifted a phone, then set it down. My face burned, my pulse roared in my ears. I realized in a cold, clear flash that I could stay and beg for dignity, or I could leave with it. "I'm done," I said, more to myself than to them. I walked past my mother. She lifted a napkin, dabbed at an imaginary stain on the tablecloth, and murmured, "Don't be dramatic, Violet." My father reached for his water glass with surgeon-level precision, as if the steadiness of his hand could erase what had just happened. Haley watched me go with that same small smile, the one that said everything was unfolding exactly as she wanted. At the door, I paused to breathe. The paneled walls held my reflection, messy hair, flushed skin, eyes that looked older than they should. I pressed my palm to my cheek and felt the heat of his handprint. It would fade. The memory wouldn't. Outside, the night air was cool and honest. I walked to my car, keys clenched, legs shaking so hard I had to lean against the door before I could open it. A couple in formal wear smoked near the curb. The woman glanced at me, then away. The man blew smoke toward the streetlights. "Family," he said to no one in particular, and laughed. I sat behind the wheel and let the silence gather like a blanket. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number: "Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We'll handle the charges after the honeymoon." Another from my mother: "Think of appearances." Another from my father: "Let it go. It's for your brother." No message from Christian. I didn't reply. I started the car. I drove. I didn't look in the rearview mirror because I didn't need to see the building get smaller to know I was leaving something larger behind. I went home, packed a small bag with shaking hands, and put my credit reports on alert. I iced my cheek with a bag of frozen peas, watched the skin bloom purple, and waited for the room to stop spinning. That same evening, I blocked numbers, deleted threads, and turned off the porch light. I locked my door twice, then a third time for the part of me that still wanted to be convinced. I sat on the floor until sunrise, knees to my chest, and listened to the quiet I'd been told I didn't deserve. And I never saw them again. I didn't heal by forgiving them. After the rehearsal dinner, I threw myself into two things with equal devotion: work and therapy. Mornings were for stockmate roadmaps, customer calls, hiring people who were smarter than me in the places I was weak. Afternoons were for the hard, slow work of unlearning the lie that I was background noise. My therapist, Dr. Davis, had this way of listening that made silence feel productive. "Pain wants to set your schedule," he said once. "Don't let it. Give it an appointment, then go live." So I did. We rebuilt our onboarding, rethought our pricing, and launched integrations customers actually begged for. I learned to negotiate without apologizing, to say, "This is our rate," and let the sentence end there. When a regional grocery chain signed a pilot, I walked outside, stood under a thin slice of winter sun, and cried from relief. Then I went back in and asked for the next problem. We hired a head of sales who could turn a coffee into a contract. We hired an engineer who could find memory leaks the rest of us missed. We hired a support lead who taught us to treat every ticket like a person. Month by month, quarter by quarter, the numbers told a story I could trust. 5 years after that first humiliating launch, an investment firm valued us at $250 million. I stared at the term sheet and felt something like vertigo, like I had climbed a long staircase in the dark and finally opened a door to daylight. I moved to Portland for the stubborn beauty of it, rain that forgives you for staying inside, trees that insist on being green, a city quiet enough to think in. The office we found had brick walls and a view of a bridge that glowed at dusk. I rented it first, then bought a small house by the ocean 2 hours away, on a stretch of coast where the wind snatches your breath and the gulls scold you for your audacity. Weeknights were for the city and the company, weekends for salt air, splinters from the deck, and the sound of waves arguing with rocks. Richard visited often. Calling him my mentor started to feel too small. He settled into the space in my life where a father should have fit. He never tried to replace anything. He just showed up, steady as a lighthouse. He taught me how to read balance sheets without flinching, how to ask myself, what would future Violet thank me for? He refused a board seat twice before I finally wore him down. When he did accept, he brought cookies to the first meeting and passed them around like an apology for the seriousness of the agenda. In therapy, I practiced boundaries like a language I'd never been allowed to learn. No, said without a preface. No, without the apology hanging off its tail. I blocked numbers and kept them blocked. On the coast, I ran at dawn, learning the rhythm of my breath against the surf. A journalist named Nick Bennett came to profile women founders in the Pacific Northwest. He arrived with a notebook, a voice that didn't crowd a room, and questions that felt like open doors. He didn't ask about my family. He asked about our first customer who stuck with us, the mistake I'd make again because it taught me faster than success ever did. After the interview, he emailed to thank me for the time and mentioned a bakery near my office that made cardamom buns on Fridays. The next Friday, we both showed up by accident and argued about which cities do coffee best. He claimed Seattle. I said Portland, stubborn and smiling. We built our way toward each other like careful carpenters, measure twice, cut once. He didn't flinch at the jagged parts. He didn't try to sand them down. When I woke from a nightmare with my jaw aching from an old memory, he put water on the nightstand and didn't ask for the story before I could bear it. When his editor spiked a piece he loved, I sat with him in the kitchen while a pot of chili burbled and the cat we didn't own yet pressed its face to the screen door. He taught me to slow down enough to taste my own cooking. I taught him how to mute Slack and keep it muted. We were married in a small ceremony on the bluff near the house. No chandeliers, no wall of wine, no seating chart engineered to impress. Richard walked me down a path lined with beach grass, while the ocean threw itself at the shore like it always does, faithful and dramatic. Our vows were short because we wanted to get to the part where we lived them. After everyone left, we ate cold cake from the fridge, sitting on the kitchen floor with our shoes off. That's my favorite photo from that day, two people who chose each other, frosting on our thumbs. Emily arrived 2 years later, at dawn, like she wanted to learn the light from the beginning. Nick cried so hard the nurse laughed, then cried too. I held her against my chest and felt the world get very quiet and very loud at the same time. There's a chair by the window in her room that creaks when you rock too fast, and I am sure the creak is now set into my bones. On nights when sleep is a rumor, I hum nonsense songs and tell her different stories, as if she already understands me. Life became a collection of ordinary rituals that felt like riches. A thermos of coffee on the beach at sunrise, Emily's socks never matching because she insisted on confetti feet, Nick's essays spread across the dining table, Richard teaching Emily to count waves and losing track because she keeps renaming the numbers with animal sounds. At work, I delegated more and hoarded less. I stopped treating exhaustion like a medal. I watched young people in our office design features I couldn't have imagined and felt proud that my job now included getting out of their way. I learned to live happily without toxic relatives. Not defiantly, but quietly every day, by choosing the people who chose me back. When memories barged in, I gave them their appointment and then went outside anyway, into rain, into wind, into the noisy mercy of the sea. Some evenings, after Emily fell asleep, Nick and I would stand on the deck and name constellations we only half remembered. He'd point and guess. I'd correct him badly. We'd laugh. The house would settle around us with its familiar clicks and sighs. There are photos on our mantle now. Not trophies, not certificates, not proof for anyone else. Just a strip of photo booth pictures with Emily mid-giggle, One blurry shot of Nick carrying her on his shoulders through a muddy trail, Richard and me at a bored retreat holding paper cups and grinning like conspirators. Work, therapy, love, ocean, 4 faithful hours on my clock. It turns out I didn't need a different family to replace the one I lost. I needed a truer definition of the word. 10 years later, on a gray morning when the ocean looked like brushed steel, I heard the front gate squeal and thought it was the wind. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee and saw 2 silhouettes I knew in my bones before my eyes caught up. Christian and Haley stood at the gate like ghosts who had missed their turn home. Suitcases slumped at their feet. Their clothes were expensive once, now wrinkled at the edges, like the past refusing to be ironed flat. "Violet," Christian said, voice hoarse, "we need a place to stay." Haley tried to smile and only managed a practiced tilt of the chin. "Just for a little while," she added, glancing past me toward the warm square of light that was my living room. I didn't move from the porch. In the pause, the sea filled the space between us. I took them in. Christian's hair clipped too short, an anxious habit, the bruised blue crescents under Haley's eyes, the way their luggage looked heavier than its contents. They were thinner, smaller somehow. But some things were the same. Christian was still waiting for the door to open before he decided what to say next. They told me everything in pieces, as if a gentler cut would hurt less. Christian had lost his job after an internal audit, a misunderstanding, he said, but the word fraud was in every sentence he tried not to finish. The mansion was gone, the luxury cars sold, their parents, our parents, had gone bankrupt after a cascade of bad investments and debts they'd pretended were opportunities. Florida was cheaper, they said, so they'd moved into a condo near a highway whose number they couldn't remember without looking it up. The building had a pool that never worked and neighbors who fought loudly through thin walls. They had burned through savings trying to hold the pose of their old life until the money decided it was done performing. "And now?" I asked. "Now we're here," Christian said, swallowing. "We thought, we hoped, we could stay with you for a while." The words pressed against something old in me, a door I'd nailed shut from the inside. Behind it were the charges on my card, $150, 000 typed into invoices with brisk efficiency, the sound of glass and laughter at the rehearsal dinner, the heat in my cheek when his hand met my face, the way no one moved to stop him. I could still hear Haley's voice floating over the silverware. How petty. She's being greedy for her only brother's wedding. I could still see my mother studying a centerpiece, my father adjusting a cufflink, the choreography of looking away. I set the mug on the railing and let the silence do what words never could. The gulls cried above us like a chorus that refused to harmonize. "Please," Haley said, softer now. "We've run out of options." I didn't raise my voice. I looked at them until they stopped talking. Then I said, steady and clear, "You will not enter my house." Christian's head jerked like I'd tugged an invisible string. "You can't be serious." "I am." "You're really going to turn your own family away? After everything we're going through?" I felt the old temptation to explain, to hand over a thesis about boundaries and pain, to make denial sound polite. I let it pass. "Yes," I said. "I am." We stood there, 3 people on opposite sides of a gate that had more to do with time than wood. The years between us made their own fence. After a while, I stepped inside, grabbed my wallet, and came back with a small stack of cash and a printed sheet. I slid them through the slats. "There's a motel on Highway 101. I paid for 2 weeks. The addresses on the page are employment centers, temp agencies, clinics that can help with resumes and placement. They're good people. They'll know what to do next." Haley stared at the money like it might sprout legs and walk back to me. "This is humiliating," she whispered. "No," I said. "This is help that doesn't require me to forget who you were when you had everything." Christian's jaw worked. "You're being selfish." I smiled, small, tired, truthful. Having self-worth is not selfishness. It's self-respect. "Is this about the wedding?" he snapped, the last refuge of a man who had spent a decade outrunning his reflection. "About some charges you could easily afford? About one slap you've been dining out on ever since?" The words hit the air and fell at his feet. He looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. "It's about all of it," I answered. "And it's about now." For a heartbeat, I saw the boy who once left a candy bar on my desk before school. He blinked, and the man came back, the one who had learned applause so early that he mistook it for love. Beside him, Haley's expression shifted through a slide deck of feelings, pride, confusion, anger, fatigue, before settling on something like resignation. "How long do you expect us to?" she began, then stopped. "Never mind." 2 weeks, I said. "Use them." I opened the gate, stepped out, and closed it behind me so they would have the path. I pointed toward the street where the coast road curved like a promise it didn't intend to keep. North, then left at the light. "The motel is on your right." Christian took the cash and the paper. His fingers brushed mine and flinched as if the contact told a truth he'd been avoiding, that I was real and firm and not coming with them. "You've changed," he said, half accusation, half wonder. "No, I grew up," I said. He nodded once, emotion so slight a breeze could have claimed it. Then they lifted their suitcases and walked away, smaller with each step, until the curve in the road took them. I stood at the gate for a long minute, hand on the latch, as if grief could be measured in wood grain. Then I turned back toward the house, the porch light still on from where I'd forgotten to turn it off at dawn. Inside, the kettle clicked, the old floor sang under my feet, the familiar mess of breakfast-weighted cereal bowls, a smear of jam on the counter, a pink cup left sideways like a gull mid-flight. Nico and Emily were in the living room. Emily had built a teetering city of blocks and animals whose zoning laws made sense only to her. Nico looked up from the book spread open on his knees and searched my face the way only someone who lives in your weather can. "Wind shift?" he asked softly. I sat beside him, leaned into the shoulder that has never once flinched from my weight, and nodded. Emily ran over and planted a sticker on my wrist with the solemnity of a coronation. It was shaped like a star. "For bravery," she said, mispronouncing it, which made it truer. We went for a walk on the beach after lunch. The tide was out, the sand stamped with bird tracks and the looping scripts of dogs. Emily collected shells, Nico carried the bag, and I carried nothing on purpose. The horizon was a thin line of possibility. The air tasted like salt and forgiveness. The truth I finally learned is simple, yet it cost me years of pain to understand. Family is important, but personal boundaries are even more important. For a long time, I believed that being a good daughter or a good sister meant sacrificing myself endlessly, accepting humiliation, and forgiving what should have been unforgivable. But now, at 32, I know something deeper. No love, no matter how close the blood ties, gives someone the right to rob you of your dignity. When I shut the gate that day after Christian and Haley left, I didn't feel guilt, as I once would have. I felt peace. I thought about my little girl, Emily, and how I never want her to believe that abuse or manipulation is a normal part of family life. I want her to grow up strong enough to say, "No, I deserve respect," without trembling, without second-guessing herself, without the crushing weight of shame. Saying no is my salvation. For years, I let them define me, the lesser child, the failure, the one who should always give way. They tried to turn my achievements into nothing, my sacrifices into obligations, my pain into silence. But that night when I chose myself, I reclaimed something far greater than revenge. I reclaimed my worth. And that is the message I want to leave with you. Maybe your story is different. Maybe your sister took everything you built. Maybe your parents manipulated you into endless guilt. Maybe your spouse's family never accepted you. Whatever form it takes, the feeling is the same. That sinking weight of being treated as less than human by the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. If you recognize yourself in my words, please hear me now. Having self-worth is not selfishness. It is survival. You can walk away. You can build a new life, even if you have to do it alone at first. And sometimes, the family you create, the friends, mentors, partners, children who love you for who you truly are, is worth more than any family you were born into. So, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to defend yourself from family who behaved worse than strangers? Did you manage to say no, or are you still searching for that courage? Write your own story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It may seem small, but every time you do, It helps these stories reach someone out there who is quietly suffering, someone who still believes they are alone. Together, we can show them they're not.